hosted a bachelorette party a couple years ago, which is funny because like I don't drink. I've been alcohol free for almost 3 years. Like I don't partake in substances because I have anxiety and I'm like I don't like to not be in control of my brain. Classic control. And one of the girls at the bachelorette, I didn't know her because it was like I was hosting it for one of my best friends, but she had friends who I hadn't met yet. And she was like, "Yeah, so you don't drink?" And I was like, "No." And she's like, "And you don't smoke weed?" And I was like, "No, but like I'm totally supportive of people who do." And she's like, "Huh, you're just out here raw dogging life?" And I was dying laughing. I'm just out here raw dogging life, and I'm that's what I'm doing.
Hi, beautiful. Welcome to our podcast. Now, introduce yourself. Tell us your name, where you're from, what you do for work, and what your views are on mental health.
Ooh, okay. Well, thank you so much for having me. Was such an honor to be asked when you reached out to me. I was like, oh, people want to listen to me talk about things like
Of
wild. I
course.
know. It's like that's therapists for you, right? Like we all listen so much and then we love to get to talk to most of us at least. But yeah, my name is Kaylee Harrington. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm licensed in Maine, Vermont, and North Carolina. I own my own private practice called Beauty and Her Struggle. I launched this past fall in October, and my views on mental health. Oh my God. I feel like that's asking someone's views on like air. Like it's just like it's there, right? Like neutrality, like it's there and like we all either I mean maybe we all don't require it, but like we all experience it, right? I feel like that's
hmm
it short. I mean, I wouldn't be here as a therapist if it weren't for my own mental health journey and history and experiences as a human.
So one thing that really caught my attention about you is just I went through your stuff when you first followed us and I was like, "Oh my God, I love this girl." Because appreciate how real you are because this is something that therapists don't tend to show off because they have their psychology today profiles and they be looking all professional and everything and they're not going to show that real side of them.
Mhm.
So I'm always watching your videos, especially the catfish videos, and I'm like cracking up because I was like, yo, I can relate to this so much. Like, this is me. So I really do appreciate how real you are and how open you are in talking about your own struggles with your mental health too, because that's not common within us.
Honestly, it took me so long to feel comfortable and figure out even what my relationship to sharing publicly was as a therapist and just as a human. So I have a like my own private Instagram profile and then I have Beauty and Her Struggle. And my private Instagram profile, I mean it's only people I know that follow me, right? Like literally private. So if I don't know someone or have a connection to them, I'm usually not going to accept it, right? Obviously, clients have never requested me before, but if that were to ever happen, I of course wouldn't accept it, right? And on that profile, like for years, I have shared so much transparency and vulnerability about my journey in mental health and my own healing journey, even before becoming a therapist. And it's become kind of like my community of vulnerability, really. And like I've had so many women largely reach out to me and just be like, thank you for like saying the things that all of us think that nobody will say because we're afraid of judgment or repercussion or like people thinking that we're seeking attention because like a woman can't be vulnerable in the world without having an ulterior motive to someone else's perspective, right? And so I, for years, knew that I wanted to be a more public presence in the world in terms of, I have a lot of projects that I'm working on. I guess I can say this out loud now because like manifesting, but I'm in the process of writing a book. I just started saying it out loud the last like couple of weeks because I don't know, it's like a lot of weird like spiritual stuff has happened that's like made me be like, okay, yeah, it's happening. But I've been piecing it together for years and like trying to figure out like what it looked like and it had to be perfect because like hello, perfectionist tendencies. Like we teach our clients to not be perfectionists, but then here we are out here like I can't wear this shirt. It has one wrinkle on it and we're like which, used to be me is definitely fucking not me anymore. Uh, So, anyways, building beauty is what I kind of like. It's like a chapter in my life of like building it. I'd been working up to it for years of like, okay, how can I have my own private practice? Because I knew for a while that that's the route that I wanted to go for a lot of reasons that we can talk about, sure, because they relate to who I am as a person. And then also, like, I know I need to write this book. Like, I know I need to share it with the world. And so, it's been a weird transition for me sharing publicly and figuring out like what to share publicly and how much of myself to bring. One, because it's scary as shit, right? And then because you're just like inviting people to have opinions about you who you don't necessarily know, right? Whereas my private community, like it's safe because like I know the people who are in it. And then also, as a therapist, it's so hard to like figure out how much vulnerability publicly is appropriate, right? Because it's like, we have clients and like our clients could be seeing this stuff. It's taken me a while to have the courage, I guess, to share a lot of my journey as a human publicly. I think it's going okay so far. I've consulted with a lot of other therapists who do the same. And I'm always like, well, what do you do if like your clients follow you or like your clients like hear what you're saying or read your posts? And they're like, well, if it comes up in session, it comes up in session. And like we can talk about what that was like for them to see me share that and what that brought up for them, right? Like put it back on them. So yeah, it's a long-winded answer, but the rawness is kind of like what I've always needed and I never saw. And so it's again, we try to like be who we needed. I can't tell you how many, and I'm sure you both can resonate with this, like just as a human, not even as a therapist, but like social media is a highlight reel, right? And so like we can see these accounts and these influencers and be like, I'm not enough. My house isn't decorated well enough. My wardrobe needs, all these things. And I don't look like that, or I don't talk like that. I don't have that experience, right? I'm very much on the team of like, we're enough innately as we are. And so I stopped like wearing makeup on Instagram and I stopped like blowing out my hair every day. I stopped like feeling like I just needed to be something that other people admired, like aesthetically, because I'm trying to like teach myself that I'm enough as who I am, right? To just be in the world. And so the catfishing thing, I'm like, I'm so guilty of it, right? Because like you look at my fucking Psychology Today and it's like, oh my God, like look at her. Like her hair's all straight out, blown out, wanded, and like she's got her little outfit on. She's in her cute office. Like, and then here I am every day of my life, like with my hair looking like this and like not wearing makeup. I'm lucky if I'm wearing a bra. Like we're out here humaning. Like we're just
Yeah.
out humaning.
Like you, I also have my own private Instagram where I share my family things. I share like photos of my cousins, photos of my brothers. Like that's my private life.
Yeah.
And so when we started posting on Instagram, and Ashley can agree, can attest to this because I came to her so many times, like worrying. I was like, oh my God, like I don't know if we should post this. I don't know what the reaction is gonna be. I don't know if I don't know if I'm comfortable with this. Like there's so much doubt
Mm-hmm.
in it. And at the end of the day, Ashley always goes and is like, Sam, it's gonna be okay. Like it's fine. Like we don't have to worry. Like we're not posting anything incriminating. We're not posting anything bad. We're posting things to teach other people that it's okay to be genuinely who you are, especially when we make our videos of it just being us. And that itself is the most hardest thing ever because just sitting there with a phone recording yourself just talking and being your most vulnerable self is very intimidating. And you're like, oh my God, what am I doing?
I always go back to like, what if people hate me? And then my compassion brain that I've trained mostly very well in my many years of being a client in therapy, it's like, but what if they love you? So as a trauma therapist, right? That's my niche is trauma. I work with survivors of trauma who identify as women, transgender, and non-binary. And as a trauma therapist, like a lot of the work that I do with clients is trauma narrative, right? Like
Mhm,
rewriting your story, like what happened to you versus what's wrong with you, and giving the position of power back to the survivor. I think about how I frame things to my clients all the time of like, how do you want to write this story? What feels compassionate and like empowering for you? Right. And then I kind of have to like check myself sometimes because I pair that often with them with like what feels good for you to put out into the world to share with people. Because we're not thinking about what other people need to hear about what
mhm,
happened to you. What do you want to share with other people that
mhm,
happened to you? Like what feels good for you to be vulnerable about and take ownership of and like own and feel empowered by instead of, you know, ashamed of. so I think that that's, as a client of another trauma therapist, right? Like I'm always thinking about that, my identities as both a client and a therapist, and like, well, what feels good for me to share? Like, what do I want to share with the world? What feels good for me to like put out there because I want to say these things and kind of like really ingrained in this practice of like, this isn't necessarily for everyone else, but it's also for you, right? And like
Mhm.
you kind of taking your power back. And I think we're silenced a lot as therapists, right? Like I talk to my husband about this all the time because like he had a chiropractor that he was kind of friends with for many years and like a physical therapist and like, these other health professionals. And like I'm like, what would you do if you saw your chiropractor like out at a restaurant or like a bar or something? And he's like, oh my God, I'd go up and I'd hug him and I'd like maybe offer to like buy him a beer or something. I mean, granted, we don't drink, we're both alcohol free, so
Mhm.
like that's another component. But I'm like, yeah, that would be so inappropriate if I did that to one of my clients or a client did that to me,
Yeah.
right? But like
Mhm.
they're billing the same insurance. They're like
Yep.
still a
Yep.
healthcare professional, right? But like therapists, it's just like we're in such a different niche. We're held to different standards as other healthcare
Mhm.
providers, and it can be really, really isolating and
Mhm.
generate feelings of shame for us just being who we are.
I think my biggest fear is running into one of my clients in my hometown because I do have some clients that are in my hometown and like running into them at the supermarket and just not knowing what to say because I don't know essentially how comfortable they are of people knowing that they're in therapy. I don't want to like blow their spot. I also don't want them to feel the need to like have to come up to me just because we work together. So
Mhm.
it's very like confusing, especially like when you don't know what to do. And thankfully, I haven't gotten into that situation yet, but that's my biggest fear. And also running into them at their place of work. Because a lot of my clients like work at Marshall's or at Trader Joe's or stuff like that. And I'm just like, I don't know.
Mhm.
I'm scared. So
Mhm.
I understand where you're coming from in that sense. It is different, especially with like other people, because a doctor can be out and about and then see their client and be like, "Oh, that's my doctor,"
Mhm.
and that's
Mhm.
it. Whereas
Mhm.
a lot of people don't like their spots being blown if they're in therapy.
One thing I've learned since doing this podcast is just how freeing it's been to just be so open and to just show people that like we don't have our shit together either. We're not perfect people. Like, because a lot of our clients think like she has it together. She must know all the things because she's a therapist and she has, yeah, right? Like she has it
Like
all
who,
together.
me? Little old me?
And so that's really what I want to show too. And this is why, like, when Sam was like, oh my God, like, should we be posting this? Or like, and I'm like, it's fine. Like, this is what makes us us, you know? And
Mhm.
this is what I really wanted to show. And with that being said, you have your private practice called Beauty and Her Struggle. I love that name. Where did it come from? Like, what was the thought process of you starting your own practice in the first place? Because I would like to start my own practice one day too. And I would love to hear about your experience.
Yeah, I'd love to share. I'm like, it's so weird. I'm just naming like I'm getting emotional right now and I don't anticipate that like when I talk about my practice always,
Mhm.
but I also just had this like wild spiritual experience with like a medium yesterday and bringing that into my next few days. It's all positive, of course, but it just a lot of it is about this like building beauty. So yeah, I guess like to share my journey in short to that leads up to the private practice. I was a bachelor's level social worker. I got my BSW when in undergrad, and so I did a lot of like bachelor's level social work stuff prior to being a clinician, prior to going back to grad school. So I worked a lot. I moved out to California. I worked in the inner city San Francisco Bay Area. I did a lot of gang intervention work with youth, taught English like in an inner city school, and it was like the most remarkable experience of my life. Came back, did medical social work for a little while, and then transferred to an agency that was more child and family related. I lasted at that agency for about 3 months. It sent me into a really, really deep depression in response to trauma. So, trauma I experienced through the agency and like the work, and then also trauma that I experienced in my own life, in my own childhood, that I had never addressed in therapy ever. Like I wasn't even in therapy at this point in my life. I was very much on adrenaline. I worked through undergrad, like so I paid my own tuition. I couldn't take out loans for like various reasons and I hustled. Like I worked probably 40 hours a week in a restaurant, bartending and serving, and then would have a social work internship, would have class. I was just doing so much. And I was exhausted, but my adrenaline and like my survival brain was so kicked in for those like 5 years that I was not dealing with any of my shit, right? Like none of it. So then it kind of all came out when I burnt out from bachelor's level social work after like 2 years. And it was just an accumulation. It wasn't necessarily just that one job, it was like an accumulation of stuff. So I left social work for about a year and a half. I went back to like waiting tables and bartending and nannied for a little while. Moved, I felt like I needed a shift. And I was terrified of going back into the field, like terrified, really, really terrified. And had started therapy like as soon as all this started and built a beautiful relationship with my therapist, who I still work with today. And a lot of my work with her was around like, well, how can I go into the field and like have it be trauma informed for me? Right. Because like I'm a survivor of a lot of different kinds of trauma and I've been traumatized by the field. And so, like, how do I show up in a way that allows me to still have autonomy? Right. So I took it very slow. Went to grad school, like got through grad school, and then was really selective about my job process and selection, like after that, because I really wanted to be in private practice because I was terrified of agencies. I was terrified of like being exploited and like not having good supervision because those are things that had happened to me previously. And so I was really looking for more of like a private practice role. And then I met this woman who, well, she was my supervisor at my internship, and she was like, I think I have a job for you for after graduation, and I wouldn't recommend it for everyone, but I feel like you need to meet the supervisor. Meet the supervisor, and then I'll tell you what the job is. And so I did, and it was a job in a maximum security prison, but the supervisor was incredible, like incredible. And I felt remarkably held and taken care of and protected and safe. And I was like, which is so like the dichotomy of that paired with working in a maximum security prison. I'm like, that's nuts. And so I took the job. I worked with a very potentially violent population, people in the prison who had committed a lot of like capital crimes, were serving life sentences, but were really severely mentally ill. And it was the most rewarding work I've probably ever done in my life. And I burnt out from it, right? Because the system. And I knew that that was going to happen. So I left, went to work for a group practice until I got independently licensed, at which point I launched my own private practice. And the name is interesting because I had known for a while that I was going to build my own private practice. I have like so many plans and ideas, and I'm growing slowly, but like I'm getting there. The name actually, vulnerably enough, came to me during my first miscarriage. And so I had 2023 was a very rough year for me. We had just moved to North Carolina from Maine. My brother-in-law really tragically and suddenly passed away immediately. And my siblings are much older than me. So he was really a brother to me. He had been in my life my whole life. That I was alive because he and my sister started dating when they were in middle school. And he really tragically passed away. So my four nieces and nephews lost their dad. My sister lost her person. And then that paired with some other things, my husband and I, he was then my fiance, actually made the choice to cancel our wedding, like COVID markups financially, like it was insanely expensive and just our life had like taken a turn. And then we got pregnant and we were like so ecstatic and so happy. And I was so sick. I could like only eat peanut butter and jelly. And like it was just a whole thing for like 9 weeks, I guess. And then we went in for our first ultrasound and there was no baby. And so uh, it was like nothing I've ever experienced. And I was, really gaslit by our medical system and just not prepared. I wasn't taken care of. I wasn't protected. It was really awful. Very physically painful too, which like they don't prepare you for at that stage. And, that's a whole chapter of the book. But during my miscarriage, I was just like reflecting like how awful I was treated and like how awful this experience was with like so minimal support. And I was like, I don't ever want another woman to like have to feel like they're alone in this pain, right? Like, and it became so clear to me in that moment that I didn't want to work with cis men anymore. That I was like, my sole mission in life was to work with like this marginalized population of like people who identify as women, transgender, and non-binary, and giving my heart to them because like I needed someone to give their heart to me, and I didn't get to experience that, right? And so I've had this mantra. I'm a big hip hop fan. I really love hip hop. That's one of my favorite genres of music. And I've used it a lot like in my teaching, my brief teaching career, and like a lot of my gang intervention work was like that's how they were like, who the fuck is this white lady coming in? And I'm like, hey, have you heard this album by Pac? Or like, how you feel about J. Cole? Like what's and they'd be like, who the fuck is she? Like what? So it's how I gained a lot of like credit with,
That's
the
great.
that I served because and also of course acknowledging my privilege is like I'm never going to understand your experiences. Like I'm a white woman. Like I will never pretend to know the life that you have lived or will be forced to live for the rest of your life. And anyways, music was a really wonderful way to connect to them. So anyways, I all my students like had never heard Thug's Mansion by Tupac, and I was like, this is a social injustice. Like, so it was so funny. I like shared the song with them one time and they were like, Miss D, because my maiden name is Dunnigan. And they were like, this is like our paradise. Like this is our Thug's Mansion. Like this is where we all feel safe, like in your classroom. And I was like, what the fuck? Like it was just the most beautiful moment. But anyways, J. Cole has a song called Love Yours, and I've always loved it, like since it came out. And there's always been a lot of verses in that song that have always stuck with me and like resonated with me in different ways. But the one line beauty in the struggle, ugliness in the success always stuck with me and has been a motto of mine like since that song came out. And it was people always knew like that was always like my tagline in my bio on like Facebook or my personal Instagram. And in that moment, I was like, this is the struggle. Like, where is the beauty? And we had just left our doctor's appointment where we found out we were not having a baby. And my husband and he was like, what do you want to do right now? I was like, I want rare steak and sushi. And he was like, okay. So we went to go get it. And I was sitting at the table and I looked at him and I was crying. And I was like, I know that like I'm strong and that a lot of shit has happened to me in my life. And I also know that I am so fucking tired of like having this stuff happening to me. And I know that the universe is doing it to me because they'll know that I'll write about it and I'll make beauty from it and make everyone else feel like it's okay to feel it when they're feeling alone in it. And I'm so tired. I'm so tired of having to make the struggle beautiful for other people. Like, because right now I'm just so raw and hurting and I'm sick of fucking struggling. And he like dropped his chopsticks and he was like, first, you need to write that down. And second, like, you're right. And also, I think you're going to find the beauty in this. And it came to me like a few days later, and I made this post about our miscarriage. And I shit you not, like, I probably got over 100 DMs between Facebook and Instagram of women being like, me too, me too. Thank you for putting words to like what I was terrified to say and what I was terrified to put out there. And thank you for making me feel things I didn't even know I felt when it happened to me. Right. It was overwhelming. And in those moments, I was like sitting in my bed, passing a fetus, and I was like, beauty in her struggle. Like, this is the beauty in mine, like the beauty in our collective struggle as this population that's been so marginalized. And that's where she came from.
Oh my
You have
God.
such a great way with words. I love it. I also read like when you post and the way that you write, it's so beautiful. It's so like emotional. Like I always say like for instance like communication is better done over the phone or like in person rather than texting because you cannot convey emotion over text. But the way that you write, that conveys so much emotion and I've seen it and it's so beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
I'm gonna tell you, so one thing that I resonate with is just losing a baby, right? I didn't miscarry, but I had an abortion.
Mm-hmm.
And just the idea of just losing something that you carry in you, you develop like a quick relationship just like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then to have that in your belly and then to just kind of wake up one day and then it just be gone.
Yeah,
That is incredibly traumatic.
absolutely.
And I can't imagine you, because you said that you had a difficult experience and not much support. And when that happened to me too, I also didn't have much support. It was just kind of just like, all right, like this happened, get out of here, get out of the hospital, that's it, call it a day. And it's just like, what the fuck?
Oh,
Like, what did I just deal with right now? The only support at the time was my mom, and she was everything. Like she made the experience so much better, so much funnier, so much just like she always made me laugh, and she always fed me, and she was just amazing. I felt like I just like I didn't deserve it, so I understand just the idea of just losing a baby and how painful that is, and the idea of just not having that much support, because I didn't even have that much support from my partner at the time either. It was
mhm.
just miserable. So I did want to let you know, like I feel you in that sense. When it comes to your posts about those things, it's like, oh my God, like I feel that.
Thank you so much. I'm so grateful that like my words were able to put validation to your experiences. I think that's why I write the way that I do is because I want to validate my own experience, right? And then it in turn validates other people's.
Yep.
And that's like the most amazing gift I could ever give anyone, right? Because it shouldn't even be a gift. It should just be like deserved. You said I didn't deserve it when your mom was like
Yeah.
showing up for you so much. And I'm like, of course you did. Of course you did, right? You would tell a client that they deserved it. You deserved it too. But I'm so grateful that you shared that because that's something that's not talked about enough is like pregnancy loss via abortion. And a society, I think, looks at that and they're like, oh, well, you chose to get an abortion, so it's what you wanted. And it's like, yes, and it doesn't mean it's not excruciatingly painful. It wasn't
Yeah.
an easy decision to make. There was nothing like easy about it, right? Like it's a part of you that's gone. And yes, you made the choice. And that doesn't mean that there's not pain associated with the choice and grieving associated with the choice. It's an impossible situation.
I didn't want to do that to my first child. And to know that that was my first child, and then this is what ended up happening,
Hmm.
it was definitely a lot for me. But now I look back at that time now, and it was the best decision that I made at the time for me,
Hmm.
because at the time I was still getting my bachelor's degree. I was working like two part-time jobs. My partner at the time, forget about it. Like he just wasn't financially there either. And it's just, I wouldn't have been able to provide what I would have loved to for my baby at the time. So I always think about that. And where I am at now, like I wouldn't have wanted to put my baby in a position where they don't have both of their parents there, because obviously we're not together anymore.
Yeah.
And I just wouldn't have wanted for that baby to have that experience.
It's not, like you said, it's not an easy decision. You're always balancing out your factors. You're making sure you provide the best life for the baby. You want to make sure you're able to provide the best, absolute best thing that you can for them. And whether you had an abortion or a miscarriage, it's always going to be a thing that you remember. And I was always under the impression that if you have a medical abortion, that they provide counseling services prior to that. So hearing that, Ashley, your experience was just in and out is very surprising to me because, like I said, I was under the impression that I assumed, oh, they provide some type of counseling services to make sure you're okay, to make sure you understand the procedure and everything. So that's kind of interesting and shocking.
I'll never forget, before it happened, my doctor was like, we're gonna use this vacuum and then we're gonna suck it out and then we're gone. We're done. Like it was literally like he said it verbatim like that. And that's exactly what it was. I was in the operating room, and then I knocked out and I woke up and it was gone, and then that was that. So it was incredibly traumatic for me. And again, I'm so grateful at the time I had my parents' support, because I don't know what I would have done just doing all of that alone. Because
My God, that wording of vacuum.
I swear to God, I swear to God. I'm happy that I made that decision because I wouldn't have been able to give that baby what I probably could now. Now, you've obviously been through mental health struggles of your own. I'm wondering if those things are part of the reason why you became a therapist.
Yeah. Yeah. I never acknowledged that I struggled with mental health until that breaking point in my life, in like my early 20s. The first time I ever went to a therapist, I was 17, and my parents made me go, I think to make themselves feel better about like what they were putting me through, because it was a very tumultuous time in my life. I mean, most of my childhood was really tumultuous, but this year specifically when I was 17. Anyways, they made me go to this therapist and I was just like, "Ugh, I don't need a therapist." And also like when I was 17, I was working insane hours in a restaurant to make money for myself, to make money to help my parents pay bills. I remember being so pissed that like I had to go to this appointment after school that took away from a shift at the restaurant that I like could have I knew how much money I could have made. And I'm like, "Oh, that's gas for my car, that's groceries, like that's the electric bill." Like that's where my mind was going. And so I was in total survival mode. Like I was in survival mode probably most of my life until that breaking point. First time I went to a therapist, she was like pretty chill, but I didn't want to be there. I was like, My mind is not fucking here. Like I have adult shit to worry about, and I'm sitting in this child therapist, adolescent therapist office with like these toys and like rainbows around. And I'm like, this doesn't match who I am. This doesn't match the life that I have to live, the role that I have in my family right now. And I remember being so resentful of like, I don't get to be a kid. So like, why are you now all of a sudden? And so I never went back after that one first appointment. My parents kind of forgot about it and let it slide. And I just continued to work. I did the same thing in college. I did the same thing after college. And then at this breaking point that I had, there was a lot of really specific activators that like really just broke me. And I was the most depressed I've ever been. And so I left this job that I was at. I had all these like grandiose ideas about what I was going to do because I was like running on adrenaline. And then I just crashed. I crashed and I couldn't get out of bed. I couldn't do my dishes. I couldn't do laundry. I couldn't commit to plans. I was blowing off my friends. I just was like a shell. It's like a shell of a human being. And it was impossible just to like get out of bed and like go downstairs and make myself coffee in the morning. And that's when I learned what depression was. And I remember like reaching out to this therapist like incessantly because I saw her profile and I was like, this is who I need. I know I'll feel safe with her. Like I could just tell. She didn't respond to me right away because like and now as a private practice therapist, I'm like, yeah, fucking course she didn't. She had like other shit going on, right? Like she's gonna respond to you within a week, but I like didn't hear from her for a couple of days, and so I sent her another email or I left her a voicemail, and she responded to me and she was like, "Hi, Kaylee, thanks for being so persistent." And I was like, what like a strengths-based way for a therapist to like acknowledge your insane reach out for connection. I started seeing her, and that was like my only saving grace every week. It's like going and sitting in her office. And that was the first time I ever felt. I never was like a big crier. Like I definitely cried in my life for sure, like when things got stressful. But like I never understood people who cried because they were sad or overwhelmed because I would just pick up another shift, go out or work or like make plans. Like I was not in my body for the first 24 years of my life. I just was not. And I was in my body as fuck in that therapy room like every week. And she would ask me how things felt in my body and I would be like, what do you mean? Like what the hell are you talking about? And I did a lot of reflecting in my time with her, like in the first year about my choices that I made in my life about becoming a social worker. And I realized that it was because I was trying to protect kids because I wasn't always protected. I was trying to give kids what I didn't have. I never wanted to be a clinician ever. I got my BSW and I was like, I want to do policy. I like did a lot of work on Capitol Hill. I worked with senators. Like I did a lot of nonprofit stuff. That was like my niche. And then I remember all my friends from undergrad being shocked when I became a clinician. They were like, what? Because I never wanted to do it. And my own therapy journey is really what motivated me. Because I was like, this is so beautiful. And I never would have had this if I didn't have this time in my life where I reached out to this therapist. So I slowly unraveled the idea that this is the field that I wanted to be in. And then becoming a trauma therapist, I was worried came too close to home because I'm a survivor of trauma, and that's all the work that I've done in my own therapy and how that's impacted my life and who I am and my life choices. And I, again, did a lot of work in therapy about like, well, is it possible for me to be a survivor and to be a trauma therapist? And is it also possible that like that makes me a really good one? And here I am. And now I'm exactly what I needed, but at a different stage in my life. I'm what I needed when I realized that I was a survivor of trauma, when I realized that I had been struggling with depression and anxiety my entire life and it had gone untreated and unnoticed by people around me. And I coped with it by working. And also, like, even knowing that you struggle with mental health is a privilege. There is a huge level of privilege that I have in this world because of my demographic. And also, like, I did grow up in poverty. And so, like, I didn't have the ability to be sick. I was grinding, like, always. Like, because, like, if I didn't, I was at risk of, or my family was at risk of, like, being evicted again, or, like, not having groceries, or having to move again, or me having to switch school districts again, or, like, not having transportation or a vehicle. There's all of those components to it. And so I think when I was in my early 20s, I became who I needed when I was a child.
Mhm.
Now I became who I needed in my early 20s.
When you're in an environment where you have to adult faster than you originally anticipated, or mentally you're able to actually like deal with, then it makes you miss your childhood because you completely skip that stage. We have so many stages of development, and skipping those stages can affect you later on. And so the fact being that you had also that weight on your shoulders, that you had to help out your family, you had to essentially provide as well, that is a hard thing to process, especially like later on when you start to think, oh my goodness, this happened to me. Oh my goodness, I went through all of this. But when you think about it now, you're like, I went through all of that to now be able to appreciate the things that I have, because that builds our character, that builds us, knowing that we were able to learn that at such a young age.
Your experience also kind of makes me think about my journey too when it comes to my mental health. In the Hispanic culture, like going to therapy is frowned
No, no.
upon. And yeah,
Mm-hmm.
so at the time I was doing exactly what you did, just work, 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 go to school, focus on that, and that's that, not really have time to think about my depression or what I'm feeling. Like none of it mattered until I had started searching for a therapist because I was like, okay, this is really affecting me now. And like, I really need to deal with this. But I couldn't find a therapist that really just suited my needs. I gave up for a while in finding a therapist because I was like, you know what, like this is just not gonna work out. I don't think this is meant for me. And then until my mom passed away 2 years ago, and I was struggling, and then I was just like, all right, I need to go back. So I finally found one, which I'm still with today. And I am so freaking grateful for her because she challenges my thoughts, and she's made such a huge difference in my life and has helped me get through the loss of my mom, as well as discovering who I am outside of my relationship that I got out of last year. It's crazy what therapy can do for you. You really develop such a huge like self-awareness about yourself, and maybe some patterns that you didn't realize you were doing, like suppressing all of your emotions and doing all that stuff. I didn't realize I was doing it until she called me out for it.
I like will never forget the first time my therapist, who's still my therapist now, so she was like with me at my literal lowest, and now she's like getting to watch me kind of be who I am in the world, and which I've never asked her, but I'm sure it's like rewarding for her too. But I remember the first time I was sitting in her office and she was like, "How does that feel in your body? What do you notice in your body?" And I was like, "Jesus Christ, like what the fuck? Like I gotta get out of here. This
It's
is
cuckoo
not,
bananas.
yeah, what the hell did I do to myself? Like, can I go to work now?" And I just remember, and because she asked me that question, I started learning that I had a body. And like I started learning that I had these like somatic experiences when I felt anxiety or fear or when I was triggered, right? That was a big one for me. I was so triggered for so many years. I mean, I still am, but like really severely around different jobs that I had had, and like indicators like physical reminders of those jobs, and like what my body would get hijacked, and she'd walk me through like what was happening and how that felt. And I mean, that's what I do for my clients now. And it's like full friggin' circle. Now I do a lot of somatic therapy and I'm a yoga teacher and like I'm a trauma therapist and it's like I help people do what I didn't even know was an option because I didn't know that I had time or permission to be in my body. I thought that life was just about hustling and grinding because that's what I watched my parents do my whole life. And like learning that I get to like live a life of slowness and compassion and like connectedness and just like joy was a complete mind fuck for me. And now I get to walk other women through similar work and it's the most rewarding.
That's amazing. And I'm curious because I'm also a trauma therapist. What interventions do you use with your clients?
Honestly, to be very human, I care so much less about interventions than I do about the relationship that I have with my client. So
Mhm.
like trauma healing is relational. Every single component of it has to be relational for it to be healing. Post-traumatic growth is so much more reached with relational work than it is with any modality. So I do a lot of just safety. Safety, I think, is like the number one modality, if you will, I guess, that I use. And I think that like I do a lot of work around trying to decolonize therapy. Part of that is like naming that I'm not an expert and like using my letters less and like my experience as a human more. Because like there can be this power dynamic in therapy of like, I'm the expert, I know best, you have to listen to me. And I'm really just trying to smash that shit like the patriarchy. I think that a big part of that is I use some self-disclosure with clients, right, which can help them feel safe. And then also just being a human, like just
Yep.
a human. Like, yeah, that fucking sucks. That sucks. I'm not gonna CBT your way out of this shit. That's fucking awful. And you deserve to be pissed and hurt. It's really relational for me. It's really
Okay.
so much intention into my relationships with my clients.
Hmm.
And then, you know, in terms of like literal modalities, like 100% just learning about the neurobiology of trauma and utilizing psychoeducation, I think with
Hmm.
clients is what alleviates a lot of shame that survivors
Hmm.
experience.
Yeah.
The light bulb that goes off in my clients' heads when they learn that they had zero control over what their body did during the trauma that happened to them is like probably 75% of their healing right there is like
Hmm.
just knowing how the brain works, like knowing the neurobiology of trauma and why their brain did what it did and how it actually protected them, right? And why it was like a safe thing that their brain did, and to not be angry at their bodies for fawning or for freezing, but instead to be aware of the fact that they had no control over that, that like their brain
Hmm.
was driving the bus. I mean, I do CBT and like compassion based like thought replacement strategies and things like that, but a lot of body work. I kind of rely heavily on like my yoga education and I have a lot of different certifications in trauma. I'm have a lot of training in trauma sensitive yoga and just being a survivor, I think also is like a modality in and of itself. I don't have to pathologize. I know not to pathologize necessarily everything that people are experiencing, right? Like
Hmm.
it doesn't, it's not a flaw. It's a normal response to trauma.
I also find it really important to build rapport with my clients too. Like, forget about the interventions. I'm not gonna lie to you. I use a lot of CBT in my work, motivational interviewing. But above all of that, though, I do find that building rapport is the most important thing, especially if they've never had somebody to just listen to them. It's like, hey, I'm here for you.
Mhm.
I know what it's like to struggle, so I'm here for you. And I also do self-disclose certain things, when it's helpful for them. I just find it so important to just let them know like we're human too. We get it. So I appreciate that from you, the fact that you find it really important to just build that rapport above anything. Now, you're a whole ass businesswoman. You have a lot going on. So what the hell do you do for self-care?
Boundaries. I would say that that's the one thing since start I never really had boundaries. I mean, I had boundaries in terms of just appropriateness as a human, of course, like in my life. But when I started therapy, that's when I learned that I was allowed to say no to things.
Mm.
Um, and I didn't ever know that before. I thought I just like had to say yes to everything. So boundaries is huge for me. Like people in my life kind of like make fun of me lovingly about like, oh, Kaylee and her boundaries. Here we go.
Were you a people pleaser growing up in a sense?
Oh, yeah, 100%. 100%. Yeah. Yeah. People
Interesting.
pleaser. Also just like perfectionist, needing to just like be the best because I was so
Yep.
ashamed of like where I came from, like
Oh
because
my
of
God.
like poverty piece and like it just there's a lot of shame that I had to like alleviate from my childhood that I'm still working on today. It was weird because for a huge chunk of my life I grew up in a very like suburban affluent area and I was not that at all. And so I constantly was comparing myself to like my classmates and my peers whose parents worked at these huge companies that like I'm not going to name here, but like were very well known and like they're scientists and doctors and like they're going to Ivy Leagues or like all of this shit. And I was like, I don't even know how I'm going to pay for college. I don't even know if I can go because like I can't even apply for loans because my parents haven't filed their taxes like because we've moved around. It's just it was a clusterfuck all the time. So part of my boundaries is like saying no, honestly. Like I'm very protective of my energy, like very much where I like every time someone asks me to do something, I almost get this anxious feeling of like, ooh, do I have the capacity to say yes to this? And then I have to like think about it. And I'm like, no, I don't. So I'm gonna say no. So I say no to a lot of things. I have a really amazing spouse. I think that is like a huge portion of my self-care, just in terms of like knowing that there's this like rock and this like connection between the two of us that wasn't always there. Like we've been through some shit. And like the last, I don't know, 4 year, 5 years of our lives, and then really the last like 2 years, we've just been like in it with each other, and it's been amazing. And so we have a lot of emphasis as a couple and like as a family on self-care and like not putting energy into things that we don't have the capacity to do and being really selective with our energy. And therapy is like a big one for me, you know. I continue to go to therapy every week and that's amazing. There's times when I suck at self-care and I'm like showing up to therapy, encouraging my clients to take care of themselves and like maybe I haven't eaten breakfast or like I stopped journaling for a week or like I've had way too much fucking coffee and I am like elevating at or vibrating at such a high level, but like I'm just not feeling good in my body. So I try my best. And then also I think a big chunk of my self-care is like the way that I talk to myself. And that's been something that I've really had to tend to and like exercise over the years is like self-compassion. And I think that goes a really, really long way for me. I also have two dogs and I'm obsessed with them and like they bring me so much joy and my husband's literally my best friend. Like we were best friends before we started dating and it just never changed. We just have fun, like doing little silly things and writing. I'm definitely a writer and journaling and things of that nature.
I really want to go back to the idea of you being like a perfectionist and part of it being because of like how you grew up and such. I also resonate with that too because I was a perfectionist when it came to school and because I have a brother who's an alcoholic and I'm physically disabled.
Mm,
So it's like, all right, he's an alcoholic, he's not doing the best, making the best decisions right now. And then there's me who's physically disabled. I was getting bullied in school and it's like, okay, like how can I do better? Like how can I be successful in my life? And so because of I really just wanted to be successful and I just wanted to be something in my life despite my disability. I gave myself this pressure of like, all right, like I got to get the best grades. I have to get my degree. I have to, you know, so I understand those pressures that you probably gave yourself to have to be this like amazing person, successful person, because it is a lot. It is a lot on your head too.
100%. I mean, yes. In my family, like immediate and extended, there's like a lot of mental health, there's a lot of addiction. I've lost a lot of friends to addiction, like
Oh wow.
at such a young age. Like it's ridiculous. And it's like this constant feeling of needing to prove yourself to the world that like, don't worry, like I'm worthy, I'm worthy, I'm worthy, I'm worthy. And I guess maybe that's where my rawness comes from, is like you're just worthy no matter what. It's
Yep.
so
No, for sure.
and it's interesting too. And I look back at like who I went to high school with and like that like suburban community that I was a part of where I always felt less than and still do. I like look at the amazing things that a lot of them have accomplished. And then I look at a lot of them who are like looking up to me and they like reach out to me and they're like, wow, like thank you so much for sharing this. Like you're so successful. This is so cool. And I'm like, part of me is like, oh, how the tables have turned, right? But then I mean, that's a very small part, right? Like that's my childhood part who'd never felt good enough to be in their circle. And now I'm just like, wow, like I'm so proud of myself for like making something of myself. There, I could have very easily gone down a different path and almost did many times. I think that it's interesting because my perfectionist part, and maybe you resonate with this too, is what got me to where I am, to the point where like I do feel proud of myself and like I
Yeah.
did build this thing that I feel so grateful for. So it's like it served a purpose, right? And my therapist like tells me that all the time when I'm like feeling shame about like how much I worked in my childhood and my adolescence and my youth and like how much I sacrificed. She's like, it served a purpose. Like, look at where you are. You wouldn't have been here without that. And now you know, and now you live your life differently and like you can rest now. Like you can rest. Also, part of my self-care is like I can never work for an agency ever again. I can never do it. And I say that with like compassion for all the people who do, because you kind of have to, especially when you're conditionally licensed, like at your, or like when you need health insurance or like all of these things. And I finally got to a position in my life where it was possible for me to leave an agency job and to kind of invest in myself in terms of private practice, but I can't do it. I mean I can do it, and I've learned how much I have to sacrifice when I do that. I think that's a really big part of it too. And that's a
Mm.
privilege to be able to say that.
The fact that you've been in the field for as long as you have now, what advice would you give somebody that's trying to get into the field now?
Very specific, and like other disciplines might hate that I say this, but it is like my life mission to make sure that people who are aspiring therapists know that social workers are therapists. Because I think and this happened to me in undergrad, is I went to undergrad, I met with advisors. They were like, "What do you want to do?" And I was like, "I think I want to be a psychologist." No one asked me why. They just were like, "Okay, major in psychology." And I was like, "Okay, cool." And I did for the first year. And then by chance, I met someone completely disconnected from my school who was like, "Well, why are you doing psych? Like, have you thought about doing a BSW, MSW track?" And I was like, "I don't know what that means." And they're like, "Well, I know your school offers a BSW program. And if you why do you want to be a psychologist?" And I'm like, "Oh, because I want to maybe like I want to help people. I maybe want to be a therapist someday." And she was like, "You don't need to be a psychologist to do that, right? Psychologists have to go to school for 4 years and then get a 2 to 3 to 4 year graduate degree. Whereas when you go for your BSW, you immediately transfer into the second year of an MSW program. So you're in school for 5 years, you have way less student loans, and you start making money after 5 years as opposed to after six, seven, eight. And nobody fucking knows that. Nobody knows that. People hear social work and they're like, "Oh, like child protective services." And I'm like, sometimes, a lot of times, and I've worked in those scenarios, and like a lot of those people who work for them aren't even social workers. So I want to make it more accessible for people to be therapists and also make it so that people have the most education going into like an undergrad program that they possibly can. So that is like my biggest one, is that if you want to save yourself student loans and, more student loans and start making money sooner, like BSW, MSW track, because you're done in 5 years. Because with a BSW, you can apply for advanced standing, and then
Yeah.
you're just doing the last year of the MSW, and then you're a clinician. You have to be supervised for a certain amount of time after that, but you're still a clinician. So that's one thing. The second thing would be, please, if you're not doing your own work, do your own work.
So
Makes you
important.
makes you better.
Yep. Especially because it's so easy to experience countertransference and then it might throw you off in your work and then you won't be able to help your clients in the way that they deserve to be helped, especially if you haven't dealt with your own shit.
Yep.
So, where's your mental health at today on a scale of 1 to 10? 10
Ooh,
being the best. And
today.
if it's not the best, what are you doing to address that?
Ooh, I love the accountability piece here. I think today I'm like a 7. When we were initially supposed to record this podcast, I was at a total 0. And it was because it was right around Mother's Day. And
Mhm.
unfortunately enough, that same week, the week before Mother's Day, I experienced my third miscarriage. And so I'm slowly coming back to life. Like my friends keep checking in with me and they're like, "How are you? How are you? How are you?" And that's the vision that I say I'm slowly coming back to life, because that's how it feels. And then I use the little growing emojis of like the little leaf and then the bigger leaf and then the biggest leaf. I think today I'm at like a solid 7. I'm doing a lot of healing and
What
I'm
have
not
you been doing?
sleeping, honestly, resting. I went to a medium yesterday, which like was not planned, and it was so like rejuvenating for me because I got to like do some ancestral healing and got to hear some things from some people that meant the world to me. And, connecting with my partner and, getting back into work and connecting with my clients and just like, yeah, just resting, being really kind to myself. It's very, very slow process. There was actually a baby shower I was supposed to go to this weekend for someone I love dearly, and she's also experienced pregnancy loss, and she was like, please don't come. Like, I know how awful that it would be to come, and like, it's okay. So, like, situations like that just help me feel so held, and just the love and support from my friends and family, honestly.
When do you plan on putting out your book? Is there a certain deadline? Like, do you have a date? Do you like, is it still early in the works right now? Uh-huh. Okay.
Ooh, it's early in the writing works. It's
Uh-huh.
not early in the works. Like,
Okay, okay.
everything that I need to write about or that I am writing about has already happened.
Mm.
Like I feel like the that work is done. Like I know I now have a vision, and like I for so long I was just like I don't know how to organize this. Like I have all this writing and I have all these ideas and this stuff, and I'm so overwhelmed and paralyzed by the overwhelm of like how do I put it together? And now I know how to put it together. So it's still early, but I don't really have a timeline.
All right. My dear, thank you so much for coming on. We talked about, oh my God, like my heart still feels just like so, I don't even know. I can't even explain it. Just your presence and just the way you speak and just how real you are. It really makes my heart so happy to meet people like you, especially through this podcast. And I love that we created this podcast so then we can meet people like you. You know,
Mm.
it's I'm so grateful to be learning from you and to hear your story. So thank you so, so much for coming on.
Yeah, honestly, thank you so much and for hearing just how you're doing and everything that's going on in your life. Thank you so much for being so vulnerable and just giving us your most authentic self.
My heart is hugging both of your hearts just like so strongly. And you too you're highlighting the work that like I'm grateful to be doing. Like you're creating this space for therapists to be humans. Like that is everything. That is everything because we are. So thank you. And honestly, it was such an honor to be asked. My sister came into town today and she's like, "Oh, what are you doing?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm doing a podcast interview." And she was like, "What?" And I was like, yeah, no big, but it was an honor. It truly is an honor to get to share this space with you both. And if there's anything I can ever do for either of you, even if it's just like talking about private practice or, burnout or anything, I'm here.
Thank you
Of
so much.
course,
And the
thank
same
you.
goes for you too. If you ever
Yes,
need
please.
any support, any kind of support, we
The
got
door
you, sister.
is open both ways.
Thank
Absolutely. All right, everybody. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, share this with your friends and family. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok, therapists_unmasked. You can also listen to us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And we'll see you guys next time.
you.
Bye.
Bye.